Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Good morning from the delegates who are registered for this Welding Innovative Network series of lectures, which is being organized by four of the leading welding institutes: South African Institute of Welding, Canadian Welding Business Bureau, the Indian Institute of Welding, and the HERA from New Zealand. And this is basically this series of network of technical lectures is to encourage people to share their wide knowledge to the global community of the welding. And today we have one of the best lectures: creating education, training, skills, and career opportunity to improve a country's national welding capability. If a country has to prosper, naturally its industrial capability has to prosper. If an industrial capability has to prosper, naturally the welding plays a very, very important role in that one. And today, all over the globe, we are finding the shortage of skilled manpower, skilled technologists, and skilled person in every stream of the manufacturing or any sector of activity. It is high time that the skills has to be improved through proper education, technical education, and various methods of improving the skills. Today's speaker is none other than Mr. Chris Smallbone, one of the very, very expert in the field of communication, and he has done tremendous service to the welding industry all over the globe. He had more about Chris will be explained by my colleague Mr. Ashok Malge, but Mr. Chris Smallbone started to identify the need of the welding capability of every country that is in the world. If I remember right, he started this activity much earlier than 2000. Maybe in the early 2000 onwards, he started visiting various countries, explaining the need to develop the welding capability to reach the optimum requirement of the country's economy on that one. And I'm very glad to share with you that he has visited India a number of times. He has worked with India. He did a lot of workshops in India, and then some of his tips, which has helped Indian Institute of Welding to follow it up, has definitely encouraged the welding scenario in the country of it one. So, without disturbing you and the speaker, I would like to say that we have today number of guests from various overseas countries, all other places of it one. So now I would request Mr. Ashok Malgi, the chairman of the Indian Institute of Welding Foundation, to formally introduce you to the speaker, and then after that Mr. Chris Smallbone will take on the lecture. A simple request to all the people: whatever your questions are there, kindly put your questions in the question and answer block only. Do not put your questions in the chat. After the lecture is over, the panelists will be able to take up the question and answer with Mr. Chris, and he will be able to address all your questions. In case of some other things you are not able to give it, we would give you an opportunity for you to communicate with him through his email, and then so that you will be able to get the required answers for your doubts on that one. So I repeat again, all your questions should be put in the Q&A box only, and not on the chat box. Okay, thank you, ladies and gentlemen. And now I request Mr. Ashok Malge to take over from me and start the proceedings for this Welding Innovative Network lecture series number 9, creating education, training, skills, and career opportunity to improve a country's national welding capability, that is NWC. Thank you.
Good morning to everyone. This is my pleasure to introduce today's speaker, Chris Smallbone. Am I audible, please? Hello?
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Yes, we are audible.
Am I audible?
Yes, sir.
Okay,
Yes, sir.
okay.
You are
Fine,
audible.
fine,
You are
fine,
audible.
Fine.
Yes, continue, sir.
Chris Smallbone is a qualified mechanical and welding engineer originally from Liverpool, UK. He was the executive director of South African Institute of Welding from 1980 to 1993 and executive director, CEO, Welding Technology Institute of Welding from 1995 to 2014. He has extensive experience in education, training, skills, qualification, and certification in the welding-related industries. And he has been involved in the work of the International Institute of Welding since 1974 and has helped pivoted the positions in IIW, including being a president between 2005 to 2008. He is now retired and involved with IIW and a number of countries in assisting them on the voluntary basis to improve their national welding capabilities and quality of life. Now, since Chris, with his wide versatility of the background in welding related activities, has agreed to take up today's presentation. I request Chris to take over and go ahead with the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Ashok, and thank you, Srini, for your kind introduction. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my pleasure to present today on a subject that's very dear to my heart, because one of the key things of this, it gets a lot of people into jobs and out of poverty and so on. But anyway, the presentation I'm going to make, I've got a tremendous amount of slides, but the idea is that I'm using each slide to pinpoint some ideas. Most of the information is all in our guidance note 5 that was in the brochure, which you can download free of charge. And I will go through the slides fairly quickly. It'll take about an hour, maybe a couple of minutes over. But at the end of it, please feel free to ask questions. And not just that, like last night with the South Africa-Europe, people were saying, could we go further on helping them look at their national welding capability? And what we're going to do is offer people a 3 or 4 hour free workshop going into more detail of how they can set up the model for them to improve their national welding capability in terms of the education, training, skills and career opportunities. So from there now, I'm going to move on. And as I say, an hour from now, hopefully everything will be finalized and lots of questions coming in. So whatever you're going to do in life, one of the very first things you should do, in my opinion, is have enthusiasm. Henry Ford said this, it's a fantastic saying. I'm just quoting the bottom of it. Enthusiasm's at the bottom of all progress. With it there's accomplishment, without it there's only alibis. And that is so true in life. Whatever you're doing, have enthusiasm and you'll win. I'd also like to thank the Welding Innovations Network. Srini's already mentioned the members and the goal of providing free online training and technology transfer across 4 regions of the world without the need and expense of bringing such experts to visit the country. So the 4 institutes are all IIW members and are doing a great job in this area. So thank you for the privilege of allowing me to speak. The key book or document or report, whatever words I want to use, is this guideline, which was established, released in June the 20th this year, promoted all around the world. And it's to help people set up the building block of their national welding capability. And that's the building block related to education, training, skills, and careers. I must first of all acknowledge the 5-6 reviewers: Miles Goodwin, Emmanuel Hasey from Ghana, Michael Kopenko from New Zealand, Alan Mackey, Australia, Hugh McPhillips, United Kingdom, Vladimir Pomarov from Brazil, and John Tarbert from South Africa, who gave up their time voluntary to help with this document and bring it to finalization. I'd also like to thank these organizations for providing information on a voluntary basis. And by the way, in the document, there's so many references in there. There's so much good information around the world. But in particular, I want to mention these because they very kindly and very freely gave me the references and information to put into the document. That's the American Welding Society Foundation, CWB Group Canada, the German Welding Society, European Welding Federation, Heavy Engineering Research Association in New Zealand, the IIW International Authorization Board, the Indian Institute of Welding, the Southern African Institute of Welding, and TWI in the UK. Now, for all of us, as the world population continues to grow, the pressures are mounting on manufacture, infrastructure, power generation, and so on. not to mention providing the basic needs such as food, water, shelter, health and education. These are major challenges. So my approach is that each country should be looking at what the important challenges are, and hopefully the national welding capability, improving that will help to meet some of these challenges. Now, what is the welding industry? People tend to talk welding as meaning the process, the material, a welder, and maybe a welding inspector, and joining these things. I prefer to use the welding industry as being those organisations and people involved with the total life cycle of welded products and structures, including design, manufacture, fabrication, construction, conformity assessment, inspection and testing, operation, maintenance, repair and decommissioning, including recycling and other environmental conditions. And that means any organisations or people engaged in or employed by the above. Also those companies supplying welding equipment or consumables or materials to be welded. And of course, all those people involved in education, training, qualification, certification, R&D, work health and safety, standards and industrial relations aspects of welding. So that's much wider, and there's a lovely diagram we've used for many years showing the total life cycle of welded products and structures. So there's your activity, there's your time. So you have design engineering, you have the manufacture, you have conformity assessment of that part, you have the operation, you have the life extension and the decommissioning. So to me, an oil production platform is welding. So when you look at those life cycle stages, there's also nice detail in there about all different aspects that involved by the welding industry. When you look at the industry sectors utilising welding, they're actually immense. I'm not going to go through read every one out. Everyone in the room will actually, in the audience, will know the sectors they're involved in. But what's important in your country, if you're going to be developing your national welding capability, you've got to identify the priority industry sectors that you want to work with to build it up. When you come to the people, again, we're not just about welders and welding inspectors. Take research and development. All the researchers need training. You've got to find them and train them. Technology transfer and diffusion people, education and training, qualification, certification, all the different range of industry personnel that get affected by welding, all the government people, and then various targeted groups such as school children. We've got to be educating the school children so we can move those in to position in the welding industry. School leavers, women and girls, young professionals, refugees, immigrants, retirees, prisoners, and people with special needs. If you're in a country with skills shortage, you can't find the people, we've got to be tackling all the different types of people and giving people the opportunity to get jobs and so on with the skills they get. So when you look at the welding industry, I think it's a fantastic industry to be in. When you look at Shell's Prelude floating liquefied natural gas facility up off the west coast of Australia, that's the mothership with all the gas supply for the other ships. Fantastic. When you look at the transportation industry, without welding, how does the transportation industry even exist? When you get into the high performance welds, whether it's a power station, a petrochemical company, bridges, whatever, welding's so important. And of course, when you get to your own computers and phones without joining, they just wouldn't exist. And one project I was involved in a few years ago was on medical devices, phenomenal sizes that have to be joined. So take the human hair here, it's about 70 micron. The people I was involved with were joining down to 6 micron. So when you see the devices, for example, that have to go through the body, can be so small. I remember talking to a real expert on all these things. He said the problem is not joining them, it's making sure you don't lose them when they go in the body, which I thought was quite funny. Anyway, so we're in a great industry and we've got to somehow use that industry to improve the lot of any country. So one thing I'd like to also mention is linking the national welding capability in with the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. In the Action Agenda 2030, the United Nations, which has 193 countries, has developed how to improve 17 Sustainable Development Goals. And all the major organizations like ISO, IEC, UNIDO, UNESCO, WFEO, all these supported, and many other organizations. Now, IIW has 53 member countries, which constitutes more than 80% of the world's GNP. So I just see fantastic opportunities. There's 140 countries there, not even members of IIW. So how do we get cooperation and collaboration going, and it becomes a win-win situation for everybody? So I believe the National Welding Capability Project ensures us that through cooperation and collaboration, both to improve the quality of life plus the Sustainable Development Goals. These are the famous goals, and the key ones we'll be looking at in this project would be quality education, which is number 4, number 9, industry innovation and infrastructure, and number 1, getting people out of poverty. Now, in the actual document, when we put the strategies in, one of the strategies, 7A, is actually saying, recommending align the model on education, training, skills, career with the UN SDG goals, but the key words where appropriate needs, resources and projects are present. Now, these United Nations goals have something like 169 targets, and they come under criticism for saying, oh, how can any country achieve all those targets? Now, there's a guy called Born Lomborg from Denmark. This guy's really good, and I recommend you all look him up on the website at some stage, on the internet. I quoted a couple of references in the Weekend Australian in the document, and what he's done, he's saying quite correctly the way I see it, whatever country you're in, look at what your needs are, what resources have you got, and what projects can you put in place to meet those needs with the resources you've got. In other words, forget the 169 targets, go for what you know you can achieve with what you've got. And in the examples I quoted, these references, the examples like in Malawi, where they're doing wonderful things for the school children to improve their education. Absolutely wonderful to read and see what's happening. So if you want to know more about the targets and the SDGs, you can go into Wikipedia. The link is actually in the document. So have other people got involved with this? Well, I'm a member of a Fellow of Engineers Australia. I was a member of the Institute of Mechanical Engineers in the UK. These engineering organisations are quite powerful organisations around the world within industry. Now, UNESCO, way back in 1969, they helped form the World Federation of Engineering Organisations, and that's now in over 100 countries they have members, and they're all the engineering bodies. Now, in March 21, UNESCO published a report titled Engineering for Sustainable Development, Delivering on the Sustainable Development Goals. That's excellent. ISOs have now introduced guidelines for a company or an organisation to create a practical framework to implement the SDGs into their operational and strategic activities. So when we were seeing this happening in IIW, hold it, welding industry should be playing a part here. So what we did back in 2022, we set up a task group, and in 1st of May 2024, we issued a report, the importance of a country's welding industry, its national welding capability, and their significance to the Sustainable Development Goals. Now, that report was released, distributed globally, and it's freely downloadable. And there's just a short report, but there's 2 other documents. One's the long report, volume 1, long report, volume 2. And if you go into volume 2, against each Sustainable Development Goal, there are lists of projects that can be undertaken in a country to improve the SDG, which of course improves the national welding capability. There's the task group we had. Deepak, our Indian colleagues around the room will know Deepak from he was Chief Executive Inox in India. Doran de Helium from Romania, Michael Kapenko from New Zealand, Luis Payas from Brazil, Rosario Russo from the IIW Secretariat, Dorothy Smith, who is Chair of the Working Group Regional Activities at IIW, and John Tarberton, the Director of SIW. And when you add also the reviewers, we had Rituraj Bose from IIW, India, Troy, from the CEO from here in New Zealand, Emmanuel, I mentioned earlier, from Ghana, Doug Luciani, the President and CEO of the CWB Group from New Zealand, from Canada, and Srini, who you heard introduced before, from India. So that's quite an impressive team in creating these documents. So my recommendation is people to be looking at these documents and pulling out what you think you need. With 7 countries, we even work with them on setting up a report based on the NWCs and the SDGs. Brazil, Ghana, India, New Zealand, Nigeria, Romania, and South Africa. And these have all been published and the links are available. Now, how does one go about at IIW helping to improve the quality of life for countries, especially developing countries, through welding? We'll go back to 1994, January 94. The President of IIW, the Secretary General, and myself as Chairman of Working Group Regional Activities, we had a meeting with UNIDO in Vienna, and they were very impressed with the IIW, the welding industry, and all the things that we started the IIW WellCare program. And as Srini mentioned, we've worked for the last 20 years on helping countries through workshops, colloquia, research colloquia, lots of good examples of how they can improve their welding technology. And in fact, people like organizations like UNIDO, the AIEA, European Union, individual countries, they've put up funding for some magnificent projects in the welding related areas. And of course, IIW has always supported setting up educational support centres networks and technology support centres networks. So these are key words as well for any country to look at these networks, as I'll explain later. When we got to 2013, what we decided was, hold it, we need to really take this program, the IIW WellCare program, and expand it, get it doing more. And we came up with the title, the IIW National Welding Capability Project. And I'll read these out because I think they're quite important. What's the idea of having a project like this in terms for the industry, the government, or members of IIW, or whatever? First of all, identify the welding-related needs in the country and provide solutions to ensure the country's future sustainability in relation to those needs. I found most countries do not identify the welding-related needs. Secondly, implement its own National Welding Capability Project, be called a flagship program. You remember the old fleets, the flagship, the key ship at the beginning there, the flagship. That's what this project should be becoming in a country. The key project that all your other projects related to the welding field fall under. Then you need to identify the country's existing capability and consolidate the existing welding related building blocks in the country to create the basis for your national welding capability. Knowing those existing welding blocks, you've got to analyse, identify the improvements required in those existing building blocks, as well as what additional building blocks you need. And then you create the mechanism and processes to establish and maintain the country's sustainable NWC. Sustainable meaning it's got to keep going. You can't just set something up and it falls over. Including the possible establishment and improvement of a national organisation responsible for leading the promotion of this project on welding related disciplines. Many institutes actually have a National Welding Institute, some don't. So maybe an educational organisation or research organisation might take over that mantle. Depends what the country's got. Now, to do all these things requires something called persistence. And I love this quote from Calvin Coolidge. He was the 30th President of the United States. Nothing in the world can take the place of persistence. Talent will not. Nothing is more common than unsuccessful men of talent. Genius will not. The world is full of educated derelicts. Persistent determination alone are omnipotent, all-powerful. The slogan "Press on" has solved and always will solve the problems of the human race. And that's what I believe in. I've mentioned enthusiasm and persistence, two attributes that if you've got them, whether it's the organisation or the individual, you'll succeed. Now, I mentioned earlier about going to the meeting in January 1994, and for the people at UNIDO, we used the example of the South African Institute of Welding as a country that simply had a welding institute, a morning-only secretary, no formal office, basically, and that was trying to start. Now, I happened to be the CEO, executive director at the time. I was the president in 1978, and the first thing I did is set up a 12-year strategic plan. People thought a lot of it was kind of, one of these visions that's too difficult to get. And what we did, we took it along to our government, and the minister sent us to the top research guy in the country and then to the top steel guy in the country. Between the two of them, they agreed to give us a small amount of money just as a starter to get things moving. And that enabled me to become the executive director. So there's myself and 3 staff in 3 small rooms in a suburb of Joburg called Braamfontein. 1st of January 81, I heard the British Engine was closing down its NDT practical facility. So I went to see the general manager and we rented that NDT facility from them. 3 small rooms plus NDT facility, which included X-ray bays or radiography bays. Then in January 1982, we also rented 2 floors of their office space for a training room and offices, plus the existing facility, 14 staff. So all this time, one's building up credibility. The organisation is building up credibility in that 12-year plan. 1st of January 85, we then put a practical welding facility in City West, which is the suburb right next to the centre of Johannesburg. And on the car park, we even had 2 disused site construction offices somebody donated to us and we used for classrooms. Now that section was funded by industry donations, not government donations, plus earned income. And then a year later, we'd had the second phase built and opened, but we'd borrowed $1.5 million off the government at 13% interest rate. Now, one of the reasons I'm showing this for, some of the people I've dealt with think that someone's going to come along and give them $20 million to set up a welding institute and start setting these things up. Unless you know some kind of billionaire, it's unlikely to happen. So what I try and say to people is get your model set up, get your plan set up, and here's one example, and I believe that I can show you other examples around the world where people have had to build from nothing and have built it up to a viable, sustainable organisation that helps the country's national welding capability. And just to show you, the other key thing is when you go looking for grants and industry support, don't keep making losses each year, because the more losses you make and the more people appear to be, let's say, not do the job properly, people just see it as a bottomless pit and they stop giving grants and stop giving donations and so on. So that was one of the things we learned way back in 1979. And just looking at that, you can see the all plus signs right through to 1990, where we ended up with a staff of 49. So this is the 2 rooms we had in 1980, the 2 floors of offices in 82, and half of this little factory bit at the back for the NDT. And then there's the facility we set up, the first phase, which is a practical welding school with 42 bays and other welding processes, plus the X-ray bays down here. That was in 1985. And then March 86, we formally opened the second phase, which we got a big government loan at 13% interest, which in those days was very, very heavy. And that had the NDT facilities in, the classrooms, and so on. So that became today, that's expanded further. This whole area here has now got mechanical testing labs and so on. So that's now 40 years on, and the IIW is still going from strength to strength. And I can give you examples around the world where other places, Kazakhstan, for example, if you look in the Casweld, you'll see they in the reference document again, I gave a reference there, how their government and Total Oil and so on helped them get set up with the model for their NWC. So that's the lesson. It's not, money's just not going to be given to you. Your model's got to work for, and obviously we all hope for the best for everybody. Now, if you're going to get a national welding capability project going, some organisation has to lead it. And in the document, we've basically given the criteria for an organisation that we believe will be suitable to launch it. But also there's a reference in the document. Plus, by the way, I never mentioned it. We've set up a resource centre at IIW with all the documents that we haven't got links for. You can download free of charge, and this is one of them. And this is a thing written in 1988 about the SIW, a quantum leap. And in that's worth looking at the committees that we've got set up, where the money came from, who gave donations, and so on. So these things are worth looking at from all around the world. So if you want to get a national welding capability really moving, amongst others, you've got to establish or improve the support infrastructure provided by the welding industry, research and development, tech transfer and diffusion, national and international networks, education, training, skills and careers, qualification, certification of both individuals and companies, appropriate cultures, communication and marketing, and resource and the strategies and all the actions required. And that's why we're saying set up a flagship program, but now make sure you do it on an industry sectorial project basis. I believe that's very, very important. And what we've done in IIW, we've listed 11 guidance notes covering all those topics I've just mentioned. Guidance note 5 is the one we're talking about at the moment, and others are getting worked on at the moment. So hopefully each of these guidance notes will help people. And this is the experiences and knowledge and examples of people all around the world, all given freely to help people. It's fantastic, I believe. Now, there's the title again of the document. Now, there's 5 objectives. The first, to establish the sustainable industry and government support for cooperative, collaborative skills and careers development. Then the second one is to establish the facilities and resources needed for it. The third one, the sustainable number and type of people you're going to need in the whole project organisations for careers and everything else. And objective D, you've got to set up all the courses and resources to meet the number of trained personnel you're going to need each year in the country. And fifth is more into this effective marketing and promotion, the tech transfer and diffusion, legal aspects, intellectual property and so on. You've got to get those set up as well. And how we've recommended the document is what we call a plan on a page. I love these plan on the pages. I got shown them many years ago and I love using them. And simply, mine's on 3 pages, by the way, but it's the same idea that you're putting everything into a document that people can pick up and read and understand. So there's the goal, to implement, sustain education, training, skills and careers building block of national welding capability. There's the 5 objectives. There's the strategies. And those strategies, we got 7 in this particular case under each objective. And the benefits of a plan on a page are excellent. First of all, it's like a roadmap. They clarify the thoughts of everybody involved in the project, all the organisations. It also shows the progress, efficiencies, performance and quality of the outcomes of the project on an ongoing basis. But also, it assists any person or organisation to understand why the project exists, what's expected for the project, how it will be achieved, its expectation, the potential role for each person or organisation to be involved in or invest in, and what the achievement of the project's expected outcomes are. And in the document, we've given a good thing there, and these are selling points for when you're trying to sell to government and industry the need to set up such a project and what the benefits of the plan on the page are. So let's look at some of these strategies. And again, I'll be going just picking odd ones out and showing you the idea behind them. Well, the first thing is 1A is see what other countries have done. Look at it. I mentioned the SIW one, but there's others one can look at as well. And then 2A is actually how you're going to fund all these things. So you got to learn. We got to learn from everybody else about funding programs and how to make sure the financial side is going to stay right. And on 6E, I put that in here because what I've found in my career, people get given grants and money and they're not given sufficient reports back to the stakeholders on what's being achieved, what the progress is, the achievements and what the value and the benefits are. And that's important. So looking at 1A again, in IIW-TIA, David Barnett wrote a history of welding in Australia right from 1900 up to 2014. That's available. It's in the public library there in Sydney. SIW, I've mentioned that reference. David Barnett also wrote the history of IIW from 1990 to 2015. And the AWS, the Chinese AMB, Chinese AMBCC, CWB Group in Canada, the German Welding Society, here in New Zealand, a small country, IIW-India, Japanese Institute of Welding, the Japanese Welding Engineering Society, CAS Welding Kazakhstan, as I mentioned, TWI in UK and IIW. These are all worth looking at to get a feel, and we can all learn from everybody's experiences on how to go about building up this model and building block. And the first thing you're going to have to do is show the value and importance of welding. And that's already well documented in the very first portion of the Guidance No. 5. So I'm not going to go through that now. But what you're going to be asked at some stage is, hey, show us the value of the products and services that you're providing. You've been going for 2 years, you're using this money, you're building up this staff, show us what you're achieving. And what I found the best source of that was back in the 94 to 99, TWI in the UK had a programme called the Joining Forces Programme. There was a £15 million programme to help SMEs, small medium enterprises. And in 2000, the UK government came at the end of the project, went to 100 companies, basically saying, what was the value of the product and services TWI provided to you? I used those. I was already working with TWI from WTIA on that. And so I was linking with them 1 or 2 times a year going there. And I used a set up our own model, and we used that model showing value for money evaluation for the Australian federal and state governments. And from 98 to 2011, every report we did, whether quarterly reports, annual reports, 6-monthly reports, we always showed the value of what was being achieved in dollars and other ways of showing it, to guarantee that we'd hopefully get more money in future. The message we got from the Australian government was clear. For every dollar grant you get, they expect a $10 return to help industry and the economy. And that's what ministers expect. And in 2018, we used the same approach with here in New Zealand, and they came out with a report for their industry and government showing the success of the Here Welding Centre. You might be running a training centre. How would you show the importance, say, of training a welder or training a welding supervisor and so on? Well, a very good report was back in 2003 with the AWS, the National Shipbuilding Research Programme, at the Bender Shipbuilding and Repair Company. They came up with an evaluation showing that employing a qualified welding supervisor resulted in the company saving $17,044 US per welder per year, and they even broke it down into where the savings were. So information like this is what you can use to sell and market the need for people to train or send you students or give you grants or whatever. Then the other aspect of it is the cost of weld failures. People tend to not look at this carefully, but I used this in 1980 when I went to the South African government, showing them the previous decade, the cost of failures in projects that were done in South Africa. Now, in 1970, Frank Coe from the Welding Institute, he came up with a report on the likely industrial losses from weld failure during fabrication in service, and he came up with a figure of £400 million per annum, which is 1% of the UK gross national product. If you go back to 1982, the Oak Ridge National Laboratory, one of the top labs in the USA, they published a report on the cost of fracture, and they said the cost of fracture then, in 82, 119 billion. And that represented 4% of the US gross domestic product at 1982 levels. So you might say, oh, but we're so good at welding now we don't get problems. Well, I'll give you a couple of recent examples. In England last month at the meeting of the members, the annual meeting, this gentleman, Keith Burke, had presented a paper. He's from the Health and Safety Executive, and they did a study on weld failures at the high level of welded fabrication. and he gave a presentation on that. If you look in the press, and you can see this the link here, all these references in the document, the new A1 bridge up near Sunderland in the northeast of England, it's got welding defects on it. Brand new bridge. Can you imagine the hold-ups on traffic and the cost of the economy by things like that? These are things I've used in Australia to convince governments, industry to support our projects. Let's take another one, which people may not think of, but I was dealing with a couple of countries in Africa, and they were complaining about every time they get a project, the government or the industry brings in lots and lots of people to do the project because the local people are not competent to do it. So obviously that's why the people in these countries want to get trained people up so they can do them rather than bring people in. Having to bring people in, especially in major numbers, that's a major failure cost. And these are the things you can put in your cases to justify what you're doing. Then when you get down to funding support, there's a very interesting thing we've used called market failure. I found this with governments. In economics, market failure is a situation in which the allocation of goods and services by a free market is not efficient, often leading to a net social welfare loss. Hence, intervention necessary to rectify the situation through funding support. And this is what I learned 30 years ago from government. You have to be able to show that market failure. So every time I've been for money off industry or governments, I try to show the market failure, show the identified and verified needs that are required by the industry. What are the proposed solutions to rectify the market failure? What's the support you need from industry and other appropriate organisation? And what's the acceptable return on all this for government and industry and the aid or donor agencies? And as I said to you earlier, 10-1 was the ratio that we were given. Also, companies, I've found companies both in South Africa and in Australia have been excellent in, once they know what's happening, that it's all credible, and once trying to do a good job, all the team, they're happy to support. I'll give some examples from around Sasol, which is a major petrochemical company in South Africa. When I was CEO of the SIW, they actually sponsored the chair of welding engineering at the institute, not at the university, but at the institute for a 3-year period for us to train welding engineers and technologists. And then the South African Rolled Steel Producer Coordinating Council, which was all the steel producers, whether it was stainless, carbon steels or what, they did a survey of the whole industry, and from it they decided for us to continue our move. They would give us $500,000 a year. That's in 1989. And that enabled us to recruit 8 consultants to create more technical support for the industry. And we did that on a subsidized fee basis. If you take companies producing materials or selling equipment, I've found that all very helpful, whether it's for education, training, R&D. If they see a benefit, whether it's for marketing, promotion or technological development in the industry, you'll find they'll give you NDT equipment, welding machines and so on. They'll give you stainless steel for welding projects and so on. And they have ways, for example, of working things out on their income tax regimes. And then what about companies and colleges? I found in Australia, fabulous from all the companies and the colleges, we ran loads and loads of activities, and these people, companies and colleges, gave us the rooms and practical facilities free of charge, whether it was for training, holding exams, running technology awareness and demonstration forums. So you mustn't be shy about saying, hold it, let's go and talk to the industry, let's go and talk to the colleges, let's get them helping us and being part of that team. If they feel they're part of the team, they'll help. If you go into organisations like AWS, the CWB group in Canada, look on their websites and their foundations, you'll see they do a fabulous amount of stuff helping colleges and schools. They fund resources and facilities to assist the education training activities. Same if you take New South Wales. Well, in all countries, governments tend to pay for the infrastructure such as schools, labs, testing equipment and so on. So they like to optimise the use of this infrastructure. So in New South Wales, for example, where I live, the TAFEs, which are the technical colleges in Australia, they allow private providers to use those facilities and resources outside the hours being used by the TAFE, as long as it doesn't conflict with TAFE activities. At the end of the day, the key element in all this, though, is to group companies with similar needs and leverage their financial commitments with government grants that can lead to increased funding available for the projects. Our smart group projects we use in the WTA in Australia, and TWI with its research groups and its joint industry projects are just a few examples. If you look in the German systems, the Japanese systems and so on, you'll see similar things. That's why I said right at the beginning, one of the best things to do is go in and see what everybody else around the world is doing. One learns so much from everybody else. There's the three projects from 1998 to 2010 that WTA in Australia got support from the government. And these are also in the resource centre, the documents about these. And you'll see here, this comes to about $10 million in dollar terms back then. That was matched dollar for dollar with industry money. And then we had lots of in-kind. So altogether, that was about $25 million worth of projects. The Oswald Technology Support Centres project, the SMART project, National Fusion Networks project, industry sectorial projects, you see the wording, and the Industry Cooperative Innovation Programme. And in all of those, we were always showing the value and the benefits to industry and government, and they love it because they see they're getting value for money. Same with international aid organisations. In our document, we show lots of examples there, and two good examples in Africa, for example, the International Atomic Energy Agency, for the last 25, 30 years, they've been assisting South African Institute of Welding and Centene in Tunisia to basically do all the NDT training for all the other countries in Africa, and that's linked to safety in nuclear energy. And you take UNIDO, for example, you'll find they were assisting countries in the 2000s to introduce the conformity assessment infrastructure in their countries. So if you start digging into all these organisations, you start to find good examples of projects they will support. There's an example of the latest thing in South Africa, where the IEA has put up more money for advanced training techniques and advanced technical support for industry in Africa. And that's at the SIW and an organisation called NEXA, the Nuclear Energy Organisation in Pretoria. When you come on now to looking at the needs analysis, you've got to basically have a structure and a program set up how you're going to establish those needs. This scattergun approach to me is no good. And when I hear people talk about, oh, we need 70,000 wells or 30,000, I always stand back in horror and say, how the hell do you know you need that? You know, what type do you need? What should they be doing? What's the latest technologies? How many do you need for that and so on? So you need to do that, and you also need to identify, establish and workshop with industry cluster groups. And I want to give you some examples of what we did in Australia. First of all, under the Oswald Technology Support Centres Network, we had our SMART groups. We started these in 1998 with the power gen, coal-fired power stations, and we built this up, shipbuilding, pipelines, aluminum industry, road and rail, bridges, everything, really great. And they were really the asset owners, the people who own the power station, the people who own the petrochemical plants, and also major manufacturing like all the shipbuilders. So we had those in SMART groups. See the beauty of what I said earlier? You're now identifying the needs of that industry sector, and that's where you get far more support. Then the industry-specific groups, small groups we had for fabricators, either in a geographic region or industry sector. Technical panels of experts that were set up by the Australian Welding Research Association in the 1960s as groups of experts. And then our technology expert groups, these were the people who prepared what we call the expert technology tools. You've got to get the solutions out into the industry. So you need tools to be able to get that information and technology out there. And we used these fabulous experts in Australia who gave their input to that. Then, of course, the groups of research and technology centres, both development centres, nationally and international, our technology support centres, national and international, and the IIW approved training bodies, and even WTA had another one, approved training centres around the country. So when you start putting all those groups together, we had over 200 companies or organisations involved, and there's the numbers all there, but we only had 23 staff, and that was part of the strategic planning. Out of those 23, we had 13 internationally qualified engineers or technologists, and the reason for that over that period was that we don't need to build to hundreds of people, because all the other groups that we were working with on the network had their people as well. So it's got to be a win-win situation for everybody. This is a diagram I used in 2003 at a research conference in America. And just to show you, those groups I showed you on one slide, how they translate into this. Here you've got the Oswald Technology Support Centres Network. Now those figures were back in 2003. They jumped up a hell of a lot in the next sort of 7-8 years. There's the research centres. There's the technology expert groups. Now, these are the 4 aluminium fabricator groups that we had. These are the smart groups, the asset owners and the shipbuilders. These are the technical panels that I mentioned. Then this is the approved training bodies network, or the WTA training centre network as well. So that was brilliant when you put that together, and all these people felt part of it. And we knew they felt part of it because they all paid good membership fees and stayed on board and funded grants, supported grants for projects and everything else, and training, the whole lot. Brilliant people all together, the team, and also everybody involved in it from the industry and the government. There's just a quick example, the Road Transport Group, Rail Group, all the companies, Pressure Equipment, Alumina, Petrochem, Pipelines, Power Gen. Then there's the Oswald Technology Support Centres. You'd recognise in your own countries, your universities, the colleges, your steel producers, your nuclear facility, your welding equipment, Air Liquide, BOC, Lincoln, ESAB. All these local centres who feel part of the team and want to help in this project. And then you get the overseas ones. If you look at those organisations there, that's the cream of the cream around the world. Fantastic. So all of those were involved, and they don't have to be on a formal big agreement. They can be informal agreements, but all those people at some stage were involved in what we were trying to do in our various projects. There's the technical panels, the types of panels we had. There's the industry specific groups. There's the IIW approved training bodies we had. Now look at the bottom on New Zealand. New Zealand, this goes back to this model, didn't have to be an A and B right away. They became an ATB with us, and 7 years later they set up their A and B. That helps them build up slowly, so when they're ready to become an A and B, they can do. And that's what I've said to countries around the world. Become an ATB involved with somebody else, and then build up to your A and B. So there's 2 groups there. I just want to give an example of an industry-specific group, and I mentioned Alan McLeod's name earlier. If that is Alan there, take Gladstone, where he was based. He was our WTA technology manager with the ISG group in Gladstone. Now in Gladstone, in that region, there were 2 major end users. One was a power station and one was an alumina smelter. Then we had a group of small, medium manufacturers or fabricators supported by the Queensland government. And then we had an IIW approved training body, the local college. This group would be basically, the manager would be supporting the whole industry in the region technically. The training would be organised from WTA, but also with the approved training body. And of course, nationally supported by a whole network that I showed you earlier. So we had it there, for example, Darwin and Newcastle and one down in Melbourne and so on. So this is an excellent way of doing it. And in New South Wales, we had the government there. When I mentioned going for government grants, you've really got to keep your hands on the thing and looking for them all the time. Our New South Wales government was introducing upskilling expansion of regional welding personnel and industries in New South Wales. So we were working Hunter, Illawarra, Western Sydney, Central Coast and North Coast. So the government gave us money to do technology transfer, workshops, training and so on, to upgrade and upskill people and industries in those regions. Now, very quickly for the questionnaire. We produced a questionnaire last year, 20 questions. It's in the Resource Centre. I'd love each of you to go into that after this webinar and have a look at that questionnaire and use it for your own country. Go through it. This Mosgas project in South Africa, that's also in the Resource Centre. That is the best project I've ever been involved in my life for doing exactly what we're talking about, of analysing the needs of the industry, all the major construction companies getting together with government and boards, training boards and so on, to try and ensure the manpower would be there for the projects. In 2006, WTA did a similar thing, National Approach on the Needs, and that's in a paper which is available. And there's an example, for example, of the training at SIW. And just a simple little example, I'm always doing this a little bit on the time, but see that sample there? When I had to go fly to Cape Town to give a presentation to all the people involved in the Mosgas offshore production platform, and they had all the top people there, but they also had 2 consultants from the UK who were both CSRIP qualified, and CSRIP at that time on the ultrasonics was the benchmark in the world for doing nodes and oil production platforms. So I'm going through the whole presentation for several hours, meetings, a whole lot, and I was going through what we could do and deliver for that project in terms of the trained people. When it came to the NDT, no problem with the other methods, but when it came to the ultrasonics, I said one thing we can't do, we can't prove that all our ultrasonics certified guys are as good as the CSWIP ones. And the chief structural engineer said, well, what do you need to do that? I said, well, we need the similar samples that those people get trained and examined on. He said, how much do they cost? Several $100,000 at the time. And they actually bought them for us. And what you're seeing there is a trainee working on one of the actual nodes. So we had a whole range of nodes, some for exams and some for the training. So that's brilliant, the way industry can help and things like that. So also other things there, other studies, but also every year in your model, you've got to be working out what the estimated numbers of people required. You can't expect colleges to set up all kinds of facilities and lecturers and there's no demand. So the needs also goes with demand. So flagship program, prioritize industry sectorial project approaches. There's a typical range of industry sectors. So you set up an ISP, involve internationally and nationally leading firms, SMEs, supply chains, education, training, qualification, certification organisation, R&D organisations, technology specialists, government departments, regulators, standards bodies, all love to get involved, and that was what our network was like. So, industry sectorial project, the needs analysis, solutions, and the information transfer. All this is in the document, by the way. Now, what kind of building block do we need? What kind of model? So, if you can build a model up, the first thing I believe is try to start introducing the right cultures into the industry and all the people. And we have a separate guidance note being developed on that. Respect for skills is a very important one. So in a model that we're working with various countries on, the first part is to set up a project lead organisation. Whether it's the National Welding Institute or an educational or research organisation, that's up to the people there in the country. Then you need to have in that project lead organisation a whole range of membership categories, membership system, because you've got to involve everybody. They've got to feel part of the team. It's got to be a win-win situation for everybody, not just one organisation making all the money, for example. It's got to be a real team effort. Then try to become an IIW authorised nominated body. Next, if you're going to do that, you've got to have the training centres set up. So that means you've got to do an analysis and get all the instructors trained and qualified around the country at every level. And also upgrade all the training resources and facilities. And then it helps you get you a network of approved training bodies. Then you can train and qualify all the people to the IIW programs and other programs, whether it's Canada, South Africa, USA, European Union, ISO standards or whatever. Then you want to try and become an AMBCC, so you can do company certification with 3834. All this helps. That's another network I haven't mentioned, because back in 2003, we weren't really doing that to that extent. But that's another network falls in. And then all the time doing continual comprehensive studies of what the needs are and the demands. And as I say, if I was in a developing country looking which networks to start, the Technology Support Centre network first, the ATBs and the ABCCs as you develop. They're the three important ones, in my opinion. You need to do a situation analysis though as well. What exists in your country already? What facilities there? What resources? How do you harness all those facilities? I'll challenge anyone in the audience, when you've got that questionnaire out, it asks these questions. Has anybody ever sat down and said, hey, what's the whole situation in India? Or in Saudi Arabia? Or the UK? On what exists in the welding field if we're going to hit this National Welding Capability building block? One other good thing we came up with is a chap called Miles Goodwin, one of our reviewers. He'd written a document, UK Infrastructure System for Welding Education Training. Because in every country, you've got government industry organisations already existing that might handle, for example, all the grants, all the apprenticeship training and so on. And our National Welding Capability project might have little influence on that. But you still got to cooperate and collaborate with these people, because they're normally the ones, and organisations, they're normally the ones recognised by the government. So I'd suggest, again, in the resource centre, read that document and do one for your own country. Honestly, it's worth the exercise. I mentioned all the organisation situation analysis. We've also got to upgrade them all. But not just that. We've also got to make sure we're taking people in the right directions regarding the technologies that need doing. It's no good saying, oh, we're doing everything construction steel, and you're trying to build nuclear reactors as well. What are the technologies you need these facilities to have and the people coming out to have? And that ends up at the end of the day under this strategy, a cohesive network of infrastructure. You've also got to know about the lecturers. You need a sustainable number of skills increased personnel in all these organisations. So you have to identify what are the training qualification requirements of the people. You've got to help them get up there. You've also got to help them by maybe having an exchange situation between the training organisation and industry, so the trainers can get an industry experience. You can implement process like study missions or technology diffusion mechanisms, expose the people to local and international experts. You've got to get the lectures and trainings updated on the latest technologies and teaching techniques. And these are sort of some of the things we used to do. This is on site at NDT Techniques. We had loads of these in Australia and quite a few in South Africa, just as part of the normal thing of upgrading people. Now, the welding coordination team, very, very important this. And I'm over my time roughly now, but I'm sorry, I must finish it off. 10 minutes. So, the welding coordination team, critical. When I hear people talk, they might talk about a welding engineer, a welding supervisor, a welder, and a welding inspector. It's much bigger than that. And there's lots of references given on this. What about the contracts people? They can affect the quality of the welding. If a contract's written terribly, the people doing the project management, the purchasing, all these people should be trained and qualified to a certain degree. Same with the designers. One stroke of a pen on a board and you could actually ruin all the welding because it's a crappy design. What about your welding supervisors, your welding inspectors, your fabrication inspectors? What about your NDT personnel? What about the people who run the stores? They're handling all the consumables, the equipment, the materials and everything. They need to be trained. Leading hands over the welders, maintenance personnel, all the different types of welders. And here I've also got various welding coordinators, work health and safety, environment and QC. We were basically doing all this, moving to all this in Australia before I retired. Also, you've got to look at what's going on around the world, because other companies will come in to build projects and so on, or qualification and certification from elsewhere. So I came up with this chart showing for all the different jobs, these in different countries, these are the qualification certifications, and for companies as well. For example, very unusual, Canada has a certification of welding inspection companies. Now, Under the ISO scheme, that's ISO 17020. But I'm just saying you have to be aware of all these things. So we have the IIW programs. Now there's more than 200,000 diplomas being issued since 2000. We've got to be able to communicate the models for careers for people. We've got to be able to have mentors, both in industry and in the colleges. We've got to be able to promote the importance of welding and amateur welders' career. And we've got to give reward and appreciation programs for the people in organisations. And that's why people have skills competitions, welded art exhibitions and competitions and so on. This was one example. I couldn't put this into a slide, but there's a guidance note here we produced in 2014. Career paths from apprentice to a welding engineer. This one's an older one even. Here's the welding inspector. Here's the normal route you go through in your welding trade, associate diplomas, degrees and so on. This is the International Welding Coordinator roles there as well. There's the inspector, WTI welding inspectors, C-suite welding inspectors, showing them how you can cross over. And then the IIW. Students like to see good career paths, and these career paths have to be made available in the country to make it easy. I already mentioned these three as very good examples. Now, the Ideal Practical Welding Training Centre. Back in 2020, I sent a survey to a number of training centres around the world. Some are very good, some I was very disappointed with, but there wasn't anybody I thought, well, they have the ideal centre. So what we did, people helped me around the world with this. If you go into the action plan on strategy 6D on pages 110 to 112 of Guides to 55, you'll find what we got closest to the ideal practical welding training centre. And I'd love you to go through that line by line and give me feedback on what you think, how it could be improved. Because this to me is so critical. You had all these complaints about lousy welding training centres. Please, let's help everybody. It's a win-win situation. A rising tide lifts all boats. But a couple of key areas I'd like to say. First of all, a practical welding training centre to me is like a small fabricator. So let's use the elements of ISO 3834 and ISO 14731 to help them improve their management performance, which includes quality and productivity. Augmented and virtual reality market, that's growing and growing like mad. But here's an idea for apprenticeships. We don't have much control on apprenticeships because normally it's government industry organisations that handle all that, and big committees and everything else and all the funding. So an NWC project team probably would have limited influence. But I've been talking with some training centres like in the UK, where they're building from, someone was telling me going up to 900 bays in their training centre. It's unbelievable because they're trying to build up the manufacturing industry again. For example, you take apprentices. If I was in industry, what I would be doing is trying to get my apprentices to undertake the IIW Welding Inspector level qualification, IIWIB, or a similar national training program. They get exemption from a percentage of the training based on the training they've already done as an apprentice. Might only have to do 6 days training. When they finish that, they'll have a qualification, and that will enable them to inspect their own welds visually. They're not a welding certified welding inspector, but as they're welding and finishing their sections, it's part of their culture now to inspect that weld visually or whatever, and that improves quality and productivity. And maybe 5 years later, after experience, they've been examined as a certified welding inspector. If you look at the IIW Practical Welder, brilliant to look at there. This is based on the old German system from years ago. Then it became the European, then the IIW. People like roadside welders in lots of countries, they could be incorporated into things like this, mature welders and so on. And the other things when it comes to welding instructors, the Ruth Ferris and Italo Fernandez from ISQ actually produced a paper on how they train and use their welding instructors in their approved training centres throughout the country. There's plenty of resources around in all these places to get help, and that's a lot of that's in the information there. And there's examples I've given from different countries. On pressure equipment, on bolting supervised inspectors, researchers and designers, like National Integrity and Research Centre in TWI is fantastic what they've done there to get universities, training, researchers and everything else. And New Zealand's got a great success story as well. And IIW, for example, had Welding Research and Collaboration Colloquium. The 2016 one was held in Hyderabad in India. Some of you may have gone to it. Very successful. There's the example here in New Zealand with the researchers getting training. There's the example in Hyderabad in India. Look at all the people who came on that 2-day colloquium. And then I mentioned all these other types of people, stores personnel, specifiers, mentors, the other groups. All these should be part of your training. Here's a great example in Nigeria, school teachers getting latest techniques for, in India, Inox Limited, we're training ladies. In Canada, they have a 1-week course for women in welding. They have educators in welding courses, and many other countries have these as well. Obviously, some countries don't have them, and that's why we're showing them in the documents to try and encourage people to see what other people do. And the marketing promotion, very important. Don't operate in silos. Get everybody working together. Implement a national campaign. Very important. And one little bit of advice, set up consortium agreements between all the partners in the project so nobody can leave it under, say, a 3-year contract agreement or whatever. Very important. And then success stories, show off your successes as you're going along. There's a great example of SIW, training disadvantaged people. And there's another one I mentioned, I couldn't put it into a slide, the AWS, number 4 in IIW's one, where they're promoting imager welding around the world. And don't worry, don't be shy about your courses. These are supervisors in South Africa. Get them in the publications, get them in press releases, let people see these things are happening. This encourages people. So IIW is finally finishing off now. IIW, in my opinion, could be encouraging non-member IIW countries to cooperate and collaborate with its members. We should be encouraging aid and donor agencies to support the NWC projects, promote industry sectorial project approaches to countries, encourage each country to have a flagship program, create guidance on the business plans, flagship programs, and help people prioritize strategies and projects, including raising funding, and build up an extensive resource center, which we started on. And I'll finish this slide. This is 1982 slide, and it goes back to my fervent wish. I'd really be satisfied if we could achieve this, but I gave a diploma lecture in America in 1982 in Kansas City, and I wanted to show, here we have 600 megawatt boilers on a coal-fired power station, the best of first world technology, and 100 meters away we have an African hut with no electricity. If through these projects we can be giving everybody on earth power, electricity, we're already a long way to improving the quality of life. So to finish, with the 4 attributes of enthusiasm, persistence, cooperation and collaboration, I'd like to thank you all for listening, and that will help us create an excellent team effort to improve the global quality of life for everybody. Thanks everybody for listening, and I'm sorry for going 10 minutes over, but I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you. Cheers.
So gentlemen, thanks for participating in this excellent webinar. And Mr. Chris, on behalf of the Indian Institute of Welding, and on behalf of my panelists, and on behalf of all the participants and the supporting countries of it one, we thank you very much for sharing your very rich experiences in this one. And then we hope to look forward to see your more closer interactions with our team. I wish you come to India soon so that we can arrange a face-to-face discussion with most of the people in this one. So thank you very much, Mr. Chris, and then for your valuable time. And thanks all the panelists for being associated with this.
Thank you, Srini, for coordinating all the activities from our end. And I thank Chris also for taking a lot of initiative to present the seminars. Thank you. And DVK to coordinate the question and answer session. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Can I also thank your Mumbai people for organising the webinar and so on, and the registration link and the brochure and everything else. So thank you, your Mumbai team, for what you've done. Cheers.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you.
Okay, enjoy the rest of your evening or day.
Yes, yes. Yeah, yeah. It's almost midday now in India.
Okay, keep well. Thanks. Bye.
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you all.
Thank you. Thank you very much.